The Hand of the Necromancer by Brad Strickland, Chapter 16. Ah, rumbled the terrible voice of the giant Murgle. You realize, I see, what you have become. Realize, too, boy, that you are no more than an insect to me, no more than an annoyance. Now that I have you prisoner, I must see to my other guest. The time is far too near for my plans to be thwarted by such meddling nonentities. The world reeled as Murgle placed the snow globe down on the table inside the magic circles. Johnny stumbled and thrashed. The snow was more than ankle deep, and it froze his feet with a burning cold. He staggered to the stand of conical fir trees. The glass curved under at the edges, with the wooden base cemented to it below. He stepped onto the glassy margin and found it was slippery as ice. He thrust out his tiny hands and leaned against the transparent wall. It occurred to Johnny that he was breathing water, and the idea panicked him. But in the grotesque world inside the snow globe, the water seemed to serve just as well as air. Now the glass walls of the globe seemed immensely thick to him, and the greenish glass distorted his view. Murgle was at the mantel, busily picking up the other witch relics and tucking them into a wicker basket. Johnny realized that the man was packing, as if for a trip. Undoubtedly he meant to force Professor Childermath to reveal the secret hiding place of the wooden hand. What would happen when he discovered the hand had been taken away? Murgle turned and strode over to the table. He leaned close, his ghastly grin bigger than a house, and Johnny stumbled backward. He heard Murgle's thunderous laughter. No doubt you are wondering why I am gathering the legacy of my illustrious ancestor. Well, there's no reason why I shouldn't tell you the truth. I intend to raise the spirit of Estrius Blackleech from the dead, with the help of the necromantic hand. I will invite his spirit with all its knowledge of sorcery to inhabit my body, sharing it with my own soul. Together we will be invincible. Unfortunate Estrius. He was ambitious, but he lived up in a poor, petty time, and his ambitions were poor and petty. With me to serve as his host and show him the way, and him to provide the magical know-how, we two will rule the world. Johnny clapped his hands over his ears. Murgle's hideous laughter was so loud that it was painful. He saw Murgle stride out to the staircase door. Johnny was alone in the dreadful trap of the snow globe. His first thought was that he would freeze. The snow might not be real to anyone else, but to the figure inside the globe, it was obviously deadly. Johnny floundered to the log cabin and tried to find some way of getting inside. Surely if Murgle intended the globe to be a prison and not a death trap, the cabin would offer some protection. Johnny was disappointed. The cabin was one block of wood, just shaped and painted to resemble a house. Maybe Murgle didn't realize how cold it was inside the globe, how the snow slowed his footsteps and chilled his blood and made him sleepy. With a start, Johnny jerked awake. He had sunk to his knees and had almost passed out. Johnny had read of the deadly sleep that sometimes overtook Arctic explorers. He had to keep moving, and he had to try to keep warm. He went to the edge of the snow again and prowled the perimeter of the globe, staring out into the room. He stopped and gasped. Through the thick green glass, he could see a still, distorted figure lying on the floor just outside the magic circle. It wore glasses, a dark blue shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. The figure was Johnny himself. His head spun. How could he be inside the globe and yet outside on the floor at the same time? It was impossible. He felt like sobbing from terror and despair, but he forced himself to try to think his way through this problem. It has to be a hallucination, he told himself. Somehow, Murgle is making me think I'm inside the snow globe when I'm really out there, unconscious. That made sense in a bizarre kind of way. But it did Johnny absolutely no good. After all, if the hallucination seemed as real as this to him, it would either kill him or drive him permanently insane. Maybe he could convince himself that the experience was not real. Maybe he could force himself to wake up outside the globe, safe and sound. He stooped and picked up a chunk of snow. He didn't know what it was, something white and glittery. This isn't real snow, he told himself. It isn't really cold. It can't hurt me, or It was no use. The enormous snowflake numbed his hands. He dropped it, and it fluttered down like a falling leaf. The power of the evil wizard was greater than Johnny's ability to reason away the magic. A movement caught his eye. The door was opening again. Something red was coming into the room. Sarah! She had followed him into the house. Johnny ran to the edge of the glass and beat on it as he yelled. Sarah did not notice him. She ran to the fallen figure of Johnny on the floor and stooped over him. Then she grabbed both of his feet and began to tug. She was going to try and pull him through the staircase. Johnny winced. Didn't she know that if she dragged him downstairs, his head would bang against each step on the way down? He'd get a concussion, or he might even be killed. Then he remembered the crack in the glass globe that he had accidentally made. If he could find that, maybe he could break the dome. He had a confused notion that the magic would leak out with the water, and maybe that would free him. He ran around the globe until he saw it. When Johnny was his normal size, the crack was just a hairline flaw, barely visible in good light. Now, though, it was a jagged crevice. Johnny felt in his pockets. He had his Boy Scout knife. He took it out, opened the longest blade, and began to chip at the edge of the crack. Little flakes of glass flew like pieces of ice. It was slow going compared to his present size. The glass was a foot thick. It would take forever. He saw Sarah slowly pulling his body along by the ankles. His arms, his real arms, had gone out to the sides. Watching the scene, Johnny missed a blow with the knife, and his knuckles crashed against the broken edge of the glass. Pain flashed through his whole arm, and a swirl of red blood flew from the cut. Ah! Johnny yanked his hand away, dropping the knife. Outside the globe, Johnny suddenly jerked his real right hand. It hit an unsteady leg of the magic altar, and the table toppled away from the figure on the floor. The snow globe, already close to the edge, slid off. Inside the globe, Johnny saw the deadly snow swirling. He fell to his knees and crumpled to the ground. Crash! With a shock like an electric jolt, a bright flash of light exploded. Everything whirled, went black, and then, his ears filled with a high humming sound, he struggled to open his eyes and looked up at Sarah. "Ah!" he wheezed. He was freezing. She dropped his feet with a look of frantic relief. "Come on, we gotta get out of here before Baldy Buzzard gets back. What did he do to you anyway? Give you some kind of voodoo drug or something?" Johnny could not stop shaking. He rolled over, got to his knees, and hugged himself. He felt as if the air in the room were 50 degrees below zero. His right hand throbbed with pain, although he could see no trace of a wound. He blinked at the floor. The snow globe was in 1,000 pieces. Water pooled beneath it, and a little wooden figure lay face down in the corner of the room. Johnny was finally free, but the effects of the spell still lingered and almost paralyzed him. Sarah helped him up. Together they stumbled down the spiral staircase. He kept blacking out and pausing, but Sarah urged him on. They got to the first floor and headed for the kitchen. Johnny could move a little better now. His legs worked again, and the feeling of numbing cold was passing off with the pins and needles prickling. Sarah opened the door a crack, peered out, and then led the way into the backyard. "Good thing for you, old Murgle came in the front. I found this way in and explored until I discovered the staircase. What happened anyway?" "Not now," Johnny gasped. "Tell you later." They had taken no more than a couple of steps away from the house when a black bird fluttered to a limb of a dead elm tree. It gave them a beady red stare, threw back its head, and then shouted out a raucous "Caw!" "The crow," Johnny panted. "A familiar of old Murgle." Sarah knew that a familiar was an animal or bird that a wizard had enchanted. Or sometimes it was an evil spirit in the shape of an animal or bird. Familiars served as spies and servants for witches and sorcerers. She picked up a rock and threw it hard. The stone was right on target, and with a final harsh screech, the crow exploded into a puff of feathers and smoke. Even the feathers dissolved as they floated down toward the ground. Sarah was shaking. I guess I owe you an apology, Dixon," she muttered. That wasn't a real bird at all." Johnny nodded. The day was getting darker with low, ugly, hanging gray clouds. "We gotta find out where stammered Johnny, his teeth still chattering. "I know where Murgle's gone," Sarah said. "He's next door." Johnny gave her a wild look. "You mean the old church?" Sarah finished for him. "I saw him slip into a side door. Come on." At the edge of the yard, they reached under She reached under a bush and dragged out the wrapped-up hand. "I don't suppose you found what Myrtle wants with this," she said. He wants to use it to raise old Estrius Blackleech from the dead." Sarah stared at him. "No kidding!" "No kidding." They hid in the vacant lot again, crouched under some bushes. After 10 long minutes, Myrtle emerged from a side door of the old burned-out church, gazed up in the air as if he were uneasy, and locked the door behind him. He strode to his house, went to the front door, and disappeared inside. Sarah and Johnny edged around until the church was between them and the house. Then they dashed across the street. The sanctuary of the church was too choked with debris and ashes to let them get in the way, and the undamaged part of the building had no door on this side. However, some frosted glass windows, most of them cracked, still were in place, evidently leading down into a basement. Sarah found another rock and bashed it through the glass. Then she reached in, unlocked the window frame, and pushed it open. "Let's go," she said grimly. She rolled onto her stomach and wormed backwards through the opening. Johnny followed. They were in a room that might have been where choir robes and hymnals were stored. At the far end was a flight of steps leading up, and on either side were doors. One of them had a shiny new padlock on it. "That's it," Sarah said. She ran to the door and pounded on it. "Anybody there?" Something rustled inside, and a hoarse voice called. "Who's there?" "Professor!" Johnny yelled. "We came to rescue you. Wait a minute and we'll have you out." In the dimness, the door looked solid, but it had one weakness. It opened outward. The hinges were on the outside. Johnny dragged an old chair from what must have been a Sunday school room and stood on it. He opened his knife, slipped the blade between the head and the top hinge pin, and pried it up. The pin slipped upward, slowly, until it flew out and clattered to the floor. Johnny jumped off the chair and went to work on the middle hinge. Soon he had it loose too. Then the bottom one. As soon as the last hinge pin fell away, Johnny jumped back and said, "Push the door, Professor." The door swiveled out, held only by the lock. Professor Childermass stumbled forward. He looked terrible. His hair was unkempt and tangled, and white stubble glittered on his chin. Johnny hugged him anyway. "Quick," Sarah said. "Murgle's probably on his way here right now." "I solved the riddle," Johnny babbled. "We brought the hand and—" "What?" said the professor. "You brought the hand with you? Give it to me at once." Sarah handed the wrapped bundle to the professor, saying, "We think Murgle's up to something awful." "He sure is," the professor said gravely, unwrapping the hand and letting the cloth fall to the floor. "He won't be able to do a thing, though, if we can destroy this cursed relic. Let's go." He staggered. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Been without food for a couple of days. I'm afraid you'll have to help me." He leaned on Johnny, and the two of them followed Sarah up the staircase. At the top, they found themselves in a maddening little maze of small windowless rooms. Finally, they found a hallway with an arched door at the end. They hurried toward it. It boomed open. Matthias Murgle stood there, his staff in his right hand, his face writhing with anger. "How convenient," he said in a nasty voice. "All the little birdies together. And now we'll be more cooperative, won't we, Professor? Unless we want to see our friend's eyes plucked out and tossed to my little pet." A black form fluttered up and landed on his shoulder. It was the crow, or another one just like it, and its beak clacked greedily as if it understood the ghastly offer its master had just made. "I've finished playing with you," Murgle shouted, "and now all of you worms will understand the wrath of a warlock." He pointed the staff at the frightened trio and began to speak short words, sharp as shattered glass, bitter as death. And that is the end of chapter 16.